Do you drink coffee?
All the time, nonstop.
Me too.
Nonstop. 9 or 10 cups a day.
Yeah, it's good.
I like coffee. And I drink it straight until minutes before bed.
I do too.
Oh, do you?
Yes.
Yeah. My
And we
wife.
will never drink as much as Voltaire drank.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, is that right?
Like 40 cups. Yeah.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, yeah. And it worked. Okay, so the one thing that we heard about the movement of Russian troops into eastern Ukraine in February of 2022 was it was unprovoked. Here's a selection of what we know about that.
About the war in Ukraine. Why did Russia invade Ukraine on February 24th, 2022? What are some of the explanations given, and which do you find the most convincing?
Well, clearly the conventional wisdom is that Putin is principally responsible. Putin is an imperialist. He's an expansionist.
That's the conventional thinking.
Yeah. And the idea is that he is bent on creating a greater Russia. And even more so, he's interested in dominating Eastern Europe, if not all of Europe. And that Ukraine was the first stop on the train line. And what he wanted to do was to conquer all of Ukraine, incorporate it into a greater Russia, and then he would move on and conquer other countries.
The Russian military has begun a brutal assault on the people of Ukraine. Without provocation, without justification, without necessity, this is a premeditated attack.
Russia's unprovoked and cruel invasion has galvanized countries from around the world.
Russia's unprovoked and unjustified attack on Ukraine.
Russia conducted an unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine.
This unprovoked Russian war of aggression has got to be met with strength.
Vladimir Putin decided, unprovoked, to start this war.
Let me just tell you kind of the lead up, what happened in the lead up of the Ukraine war. The Ukraine war, we were lied to because we're told, oh yeah, this evil Putin trying to take over Europe, and this is his first step to reestablishing the Soviet Empire. And that, it's the same comic
And is
book.
that a lie?
Yeah, it's the same comic book description we were given of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, which we were just lied into a war. And yeah, it was a slam dunk that he had weapons of mass destruction. Of course he didn't, and he had nothing to do with terrorism. And he was running the most progressive nation in the Mideast. It was a secularized nation. It wasn't a theocracy. He wouldn't let people,
And I will agree that maybe
right,
in hindsight that was a mistake. But
all right,
Putin,
then let me tell you what happened. The real story behind what happened in Ukraine. And let me go back to 1992, because 1992 the walls come down, the Berlin Wall comes down, and Gorbachev does something very courageous. He goes to Tony Blair and George Bush, and he says, I'm going to allow you to do something that nobody in their right mind would do, which is I'm going to remove 450,000 Russian troops from East Germany, and I'm going to allow you to unify East Germany under NATO, which is a hostile army. But I want one commitment from you. You will never move NATO further to the east. James Baker, who was then Secretary of State, famously said to him, we will not move NATO 1 inch to the east.
Deal with Russia. We never told them that we wouldn't expand. We never put that in writing. We're a defensive organization that is totally peaceful, and we have every right to expand. U.S. Secretary of State James Baker put it in writing, sending a letter to Gorbachev in Russia saying, quote, NATO won't expand even 1 inch to the east. And you have our assurances of that.
So then, 5 years later, 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the first of the neocons, comes along and proposes, let's move NATO to right up to the Russian borders. We're into 15 nations, okay? And at that time, the most important diplomats in American history at that time were George Kennan, who was the architect of the containment policy during the Cold War. He said, if you do that, you're going to force, this is crazy, it's insane. Russia just lost the Cold War. We should be giving them a Marshall Plan and integrating them into the civilized society, the Western society. Don't make them an enemy. Don't treat them like they're still an enemy. This is going to force a violent military response from Russia if you do that. Bill Pierce, who was then the Secretary of Defense, threatened Clinton that he would resign if they went ahead with this plan because it was so reckless. And Bill Pierce is now the head of the CIA. Bill Perry, who was the U.S. ambassador to Russia at the time, said the same thing. Why are you doing this? This is crazy. So between now and then, we moved NATO.
President Putin declared in the autumn of 2021, and he actually sent a draft treaty that he wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us. And that was a precondition for not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that.
When you move them into a new country, they have to sign a contract that conforms all their weapons purchases to NATO specifications, which means you have to buy the weapons from Northrop Grumman, from these big U.S. military companies.
Most of that money goes to 5 major U.S. defense contractors.
Yes.
To replace at 5 times the cost what the weapons cost that we already sent the Ukrainians. Meaning, if we send them something that was built 10 years ago, well, now it's going to cost 4 and 5 times as much. So again, it's a massive grift paid by a Pentagon that doesn't know how to buy stuff cost effectively. It doesn't change the outcome on the battle.
Look, at some point I realized we had spent more in Ukraine than we spend on all our roads and bridges in the United States. And I tweeted that. And Newsweek did a fact check on me. And what they found out is it was true. And, when you get the fact checkers to admit that a conservative, when they give them a mostly true rating, it's a metaphysical certainty. And since then, we've spent twice as much in Ukraine as we do on all of our roads and bridges federally in the United States. That is money that could have gone to double our infrastructure. Yet we're blowing up infrastructure that we're going to end up, I hate this, but they're going to tell us that we have to rebuild it when this is all over with.
Більшість грошей, які нам давали Сполучені Штати Америки на зброю, це мільярди грошей. Я їм дуже вдячний. Двопартійній підтримці і президенту Байдену. Я дуже їм вдячний. Але більше 70% цих грошей залишили в Сполучених Штатах Америки.
Ministers have gathered in advance, and their big mission? A long-term plan for Ukraine. NATO is looking to raise $100 billion for Kiev. This money will be spread across 5 years. But why now? It's been more than 2 years since the war started. So why is NATO proposing this now? Listen to what the alliance chief said.
We are now discussing ways to institutionalize more of the support within a NATO framework, to make it more predictable, to make it more
corruption, scandal, big business, or reform. War hit Ukraine up for sale?
This is a war that should have never happened. It's a war the Russians tried repeatedly to settle on terms that were very, very beneficial to Ukraine and us. The major thing they wanted was for us to keep NATO out of the Ukraine.
Has Kyiv sold Ukraine to BlackRock? Big companies have their eyes set on Ukraine?
The big military contractors want to add new countries to NATO all the time. Why? Because then that country has to conform its military purchases to NATO weapon specifications, which means certain companies, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed, get a trapped market.
Nephew of 35th U.S. President John F. Kennedy makes explosive claims. Is this U.S. company trying to control Ukraine? U.S. and corporates trying to cash in on a disaster?
March of 2022, we committed $113 billion. Just to give you an example, we could have built a home for almost every homeless person in this country. We then committed another $24 billion since then, 2 months ago, and now President Biden's asking for another $60 billion. But the big, big expenses are going to come after the war.
Ukraine is already opening up for big investment, and hand-rubbing has been happening over a potential business bonanza. War hit Ukraine might not look like a good financial investment with no end in sight. Kyiv engaged BlackRock and JP Morgan in 2023 to help set up a fund to raise public capital that could attract private investment for Ukraine's reconstruction. But has the Russia-Ukraine war created a massive profit opportunity for leading US companies? Has Kyiv fallen into the hands of BlackRock?
When we have to rebuild all the things that we destroyed, Mitch McConnell was asked, can we really afford to spend $113 billion to Ukraine? He said, don't worry. It's not really going to Ukraine.
It's going to American defense manufacturers.
So he just admitted it's a money laundering scheme. And who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock.
In 2022, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and BlackRock CEO Larry Fink agreed to work together on investments aimed at rebuilding the war-torn country after Russia's invasion. As per experts, when Vladimir Putin signaled Ukraine invasion, Kyiv went into an economic isolation. However, collaboration of Zelensky's government with BlackRock began in September 2022. Seeing this as an opportunity amid the tragedy, 500 global businesses from 42 countries signed the Ukraine Business Compact to help realize its huge potential. Western governments and corporate leaders have made no secret of their enthusiasm to alter Ukraine's political economy. So the whole Ukraine goes for sale with massive profit opportunities being created by the war?
Yeah, of course it's not. So why do they call it a loan? Because if they call it a loan, they can impose loan conditions. And what are the loan conditions that we impose on? Number one, an extreme austerity program, so that if you're poor in Ukraine, you're going to be poor forever. Number two, most important, Ukraine has to put all of its government-owned assets up for sale to multinational corporations, including all of its agricultural land, the biggest single asset in Europe. In Ukraine, there's been 1,000 years of war fought over that land. It's the richest farmland in the world. It's the breadbasket of Europe. 500,000 kids almost, Ukrainians have died to keep that land as part of Ukraine. They almost certainly didn't know about this loan condition.
Kennedy has been a frequent critic of America's involvement in supporting Ukraine from Russia's invasion, which he has repeatedly referred to as a proxy war. The agreement between BlackRock and Ukraine emerged days after Zelensky traveled to Washington for a meeting with President Biden. Ukraine's economic toll remains unclear after Russian President Vladimir Putin sent in his forces in February. Kennedy took direct aim at US foreign policy, calling the war in Ukraine a creation of a relentless mentality of foreign domination. As per many geopolitical and economic experts, this is a familiar story when it comes to crisis-riven nations that come to rely.
We are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union.
If Ukraine falls, I really believe that NATO will be in a fight with Russia.
General Lee's time expired. Chair now recognizes General Lee from South Carolina.
For peace, and NATO crapping all over it, saying, no, we don't want your peace. Take your peace and shove it. We want more war.
So this is not a peace proposal?
To Biden, shaking hands with Zelensky, agreeing to fund Ukraine for another 10 years. 10 more years, billions of dollars, while America crumbles. Yes, we're going to send billions to the most corrupt government in Europe.
I think Zelensky is maybe the greatest salesman of any politician that's ever lived. Every time he comes to our country, he walks away with $60 billion.
Profile reveals massive corruption inside Ukraine. That's according to Time magazine, which writes on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. A top Ukrainian presidential advisor has apparently warned that, quote, people are stealing like there's no tomorrow.
Kiev afastou do cargo vários altos responsáveis ucranianos no primeiro grande escândalo de corrupção desde o início da invasão russa. A mais recente baixa foi o chefe adjunto do gabinete presidencial Kirilo Timoshenko, acusado de usar um todo-terreno de luxo oferecido pela General Motors.
Vários funcionários do alto escalão do governo da Ucrânia renunciaram aos cargos em meio a escândalos de corrupção. Entre as baixas está o principal conselheiro do presidente Volodymyr Zelensky, quem conta é o correspondente Felipe Kili.
Ministros do exterior de países da União Europeia aprovaram outro pacote de 500 milhões de euros para enviar a Kiev. A gente tem acompanhado desde o começo da guerra os montantes que são enviados ao governo ucraniano. Bom, são dois escândalos de corrupção. O primeiro deles, o Ministério da Defesa teria assinado contratos superfaturados de alimentos para enviar a soldados da linha de frente. E é claro que isso gerou muita especulação, quem que assinou esse contrato e quem pode estar ganhando dinheiro. O Ministério da Defesa afirma que foi um erro técnico. É em relação ao ministro da Infraestrutura, que teria recebido uma propina de $400 mil para assinar um contrato e importar geradores.
O vice-ministro da Defesa, Vyacheslav Shapovalov, foi destituído pelo alegado envolvimento em contratos de abastecimento irregulares para o Exército. O vice-procurador-geral Alexei Simonenko também se demitiu, depois de revelado que foi de férias para a Espanha em plena guerra. As revelações começaram no domingo com a detenção do vice-ministro das Infraestruturas Vassil Lozinski, acusado de receber um suborno de 370 mil euros. Até ao momento foram também afastados outros 2 vice-ministros, 2 dirigentes de agências governamentais e 5 governadores regionais.
A Ucrânia revelou um esquema de corrupção e desvio de fundos do Estado que envolve pessoas ligadas ao Ministério da Defesa, a uma empresa nacional de armamento e a uma empresa comercial estrangeira. Segundo o Serviço de Segurança do país, antigos e atuais funcionários do Ministério e dirigentes de empresas estiveram envolvidos na fraude. O objetivo era desviar quase $40 milhões do orçamento através da compra de 100 mil morteiros para as Forças Armadas.
O Alexei Reznikov estava à frente do Ministério da Defesa desde 3 meses antes da invasão russa. Ele foi um dos responsáveis pela estrutura da resistência militar contra a Rússia e também pelas negociações de transferência de armamentos com as autoridades ocidentais. Um pacote de aproximadamente $40 bilhões em assistência financeira enviada pelos Estados Unidos desde fevereiro de 2022 e 12 bilhões de euros em recursos entregues pela União Europeia somente nesse ano.
Armata!
Mas além dos avanços tímidos das forças ucranianas na ofensiva de primavera, Reznikov estava sob pressão desde janeiro. Na ocasião, um jornalista investigativo ucraniano revelou um escândalo de superfaturamento na alimentação dos militares. O contrato, assinado em dezembro do ano passado e avaliado em mais de 300 milhões de euros. Nele, os preços dos produtos eram 2 e até 3 vezes mais caros que o valor de mercado. E a fornecedora tinha indícios de ser uma empresa fantasma criada por funcionários do Serviço de Alimentação Militar. Além disso, em agosto deste ano, Zelensky demitiu todos os chefes de recrutamento regionais, tendo aberto mais de 100 processos judiciais, a maioria deles por enriquecimento ilícito. Um desses chefes, na região de Odessa, tinha imóveis avaliados em milhões de dólares na Espanha, segundo denunciou um jornal ucraniano. Escândalos que custaram o cargo do ministro da Defesa e que geram dúvidas perigosas em meio a uma guerra que ameaça a própria existência da Ucrânia.
Nós não podemos esquecer também que quando nós falamos de Ucrânia, nós estamos falando também de problemas de toda a natureza. Uma delas é corrupção. As armas nem sempre ficaram na Ucrânia. As armas chegaram e saíram. Isso não é a minha ou a sua opinião. É uma matéria muito corajosa da BBC World.
Bom, desde dezembro de 2020, Hunter é investigado pelo Departamento de Justiça de Delaware, nos Estados Unidos, que apura supostas irregularidades fiscais do filho de Biden. Em março deste ano, o New York Times reportou que Hunter pagou dívidas fiscais estimadas em mais de $1 milhão. Os negócios de Hunter Biden fora dos Estados Unidos voltaram a ganhar destaque recente na mídia internacional. Ao mesmo tempo, voltou ao debate público a relação do filho do presidente Joe Biden com a Burisma Holdings, uma grande empresa do setor de petróleo e gás natural com sede na Ucrânia. O que a justiça investiga é se, durante as atividades comerciais com países da Ásia e da Europa, o filho de Biden tenha realizado lavagem de dinheiro e se ele recebeu vantagem indevida em troca de favores para empresas estrangeiras. Hunter não foi acusado de nenhum crime até o momento e nega qualquer irregularidade. Mas as investigações avançaram nos últimos meses, com investigadores federais ouvindo testemunhas e reunindo informações de lobistas ligados a Hunter.
O Partido Republicano dos Estados Unidos quer saber se o filho do presidente Joe Biden teve acesso a documentos sigilosos do governo. Os papéis foram encontrados na casa de Biden, no estado de Delaware. Em uma carta enviada à Casa Branca, um deputado do partido da oposição disse que o endereço estava cadastrado na carteira de habilitação do filho do presidente, Hunter Biden, até 2018. O congressista afirmou que o fato é preocupante. Hunter já foi acusado de se aproveitar do cargo do pai para benefício próprio, enquanto trabalhava para uma empresa de gás ucraniana.
O Biden, o presidente lá dos Estados Unidos, ele tem um filho, que é o Hunter Biden. Um filho que vem sendo investigado e que agora já tem condenação para ele. É a primeira vez na história dos Estados Unidos que um filho de um ex-presidente é condenado. Por causa de quê, hein? Por que ele foi condenado, Parte?
Olha, Joel, ainda não saiu a pena, a condenação, mas enfim, já está aqui, né, a decisão do Tribunal de Justiça lá dos Estados Unidos. E por quê? Por posse ilegal de arma de fogo. Hunter Biden foi condenado, então, por ter mentido quando preencheu um documento federal para comprar uma pistola. Esse caso tem tempo, hein? Aconteceu em 2018. Na época, ele lutava contra o vício em álcool e drogas, como crack e cocaína. Segundo a promotoria, Hunter marcou ali no formulário que ele não usava drogas ilícitas, o que é essencial para que uma pessoa possa comprar uma arma nos Estados Unidos. Os 12 jurados não acreditaram, Joel. A sentença, ele já foi condenado então, mas a sentença só será anunciada em até 4 meses. E essa pena, viu, Joel, pode chegar a 25 anos de prisão, além de multa e uma multa, aliás, bem salgada, superior a R$4 milhões.
Ele era investigado também lá na Ucrânia por alguns serviços prestados lá através de uma empresa, e durante a investigação, o promotor, que era o responsável pela investigação, ele foi tirado de curso, foi tirado do meio da investigação. Então, esse Hunter Biden aí acaba sendo uma pedra no sapato do próprio Joe Biden, o presidente dos Estados Unidos.
2 years into the war, according to the article, 59% of Americans do not want Congress to provide more weapons to Ukraine, up from 35% in June. The profile details alleged scandals in Zelensky's circle and says that the president has given strict orders for his staff to, quote, avoid the slightest perception of self-enrichment. Don't buy anything, don't take vacations, just sit at your desk, be quiet and work, according to one staffer.
E os europeus aqui estão pagando da União Europeia por meio de impostos. Esse dinheiro é enviado à Ucrânia, mas acaba caindo em esquemas de corrupção.
Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. How much do you know about Volodymyr Zelensky? He's the president of Ukraine. The West is drawing parallels between him and the Chinese student who stood in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square in 1989. They say, like him, Zelensky too is standing up to the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. Volodymyr Zelensky has become the most admired person of the free world. His Legos are being sold. There is Zelensky merchandise. So much is being written about him, but mostly by the West. So far, we've seen Zelensky through the Western lens, one that sees Putin as the villain and Zelensky as the hero. Putin, the man who tags polar bears, and Zelensky, the president who dances to cha-cha. Putin is cold, Zelensky is funny. Putin barely talks about his family, Zelensky shares photos of his wife and children. Ever since the war in Ukraine broke out, the West has presented Zelensky as the antithesis of Putin, basically the good guy in this story. But this is the West's story. Let's look at Zelensky independent of the story. Who is he? Some say, like Putin, Zelensky too has authoritarian traits. Volodymyr Zelensky is 44 years old. He grew up in a town called Kryvyi Rih. This is where it's located on the map. Zelensky's father was a computer science professor. His mother was an engineer. He grew up in one of the better neighborhoods of the town. While the young men of Kryvyi Rih wore tracksuits, Zelensky wore classy suits. He liked English rock. He played the guitar. Even shared a pair of blue jeans with his friend, Alexander Pikalov. The denim would go back and forth between the two, depending on who had a date. So goes the story. The Soviet Union, though, collapsed when Zelensky was growing up. The post-Soviet era gave him the chance to mock politicians in broad daylight. A comedy show sprung up on Russian TV called KVN. It pit teams from across former Soviet states against one another. At 17, Zelensky became part of the team representing Kryvyi Rih. Soon he and his friends created their own troupe. It was named the 95th Quarter, or Quartal 95. Critics say Zelensky's comedy was quote-unquote puerile, vulgar and working class. It is said that Zelensky's mother once visited the rehearsal. She was not happy with what she saw. The distressed woman would pull Zelensky's friend aside and ask, "He's going to be a lawyer, isn't he?" Zelensky did go on to study law, but he built a career in comedy. Back in those days, oligarchs would often invite comics and satirists to their parties. Zelensky was invited to perform at Viktor Yanukovych's birthday party. We are talking about the Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, who was ousted in the Euromaidan revolution of 2014. Did Zelensky perform before Yanukovych? Reports say he did. When Crimea was annexed in 2014, Zelensky declared he did not want anything to do with Russia. His troop cut all ties with the Russian market. It also donated 1 million hryvnia to the Ukrainian army. Not only was he a successful comic, but also Ukraine's most successful producer. He had a fancy office in Kiev with a panoramic view of the city. He bought a 15-room villa in Tuscany, one that he never declared during his presidential campaign. By 2012, long before Crimea happened, Zelensky was sitting on some $15 million. He did not lose much by cutting off ties with Russia. But he made immense gains in terms of his popularity. Soon, Zelensky started work on his most successful show, a sitcom called Servant of the People. He played a high school teacher named Goloborodko, who was caught on tape ranting about corruption, and this monologue goes viral, and the teacher becomes president. Goloborodko sets out to chart his own path. He surrounds himself with old friends instead of the old ruling class. He appoints inexperienced people to office. Turns out all of this could have been a campaign announcement spread over 3 seasons. The show ran from 2015 to 2019. In the final hours of 2018, Zelensky announced that he would run for office. He had no experience, but 2 big promises. 1, he would fight corruption and confront Ukraine's oligarchs, and 2, he would end the war in Donbass. Zelensky declared, "You don't need experience to be president, you just need to be a decent human being." Volodymyr Zelensky is a native Russian speaker. His career as comic was all about depicting past presidents in a bad light, be it Viktor Yushchenko, Viktor Yanukovych, or Petro Poroshenko. Zelensky promised to be nothing like them. He projected himself as the total alternative to these presidents. 73% of Ukrainian voters put their weight behind him. He assumed office on the 2nd of May 2019. Just like Goloborodko, Zelensky installed friends in high offices, be it his writing partners, the head of his production company, or his lawyer. They were all made part of the government. And here we are 3 years later. The war in Donbass has not ended. Instead, it has escalated into Europe's biggest crisis since World War II. About 1,000 civilians have been killed in Ukraine alone. More than 1,500 people have been injured. At least 3 million people have fled Ukraine. Zelensky failed to keep his promise, and he could not have failed in a worse way. But he did rise to the crisis. When the US offered to fly him out of Ukraine, Zelensky said, "I need ammo, not a ride." The president appears on TV every day, and every day he's wearing a sap green t-shirt. He's visibly exhausted and mostly unshaved. On the 6th day of the war, Zelensky addressed the European Parliament via a video link. Do prove that you're with us, he said. His interpreter appeared to choke on his tears. Do prove that you will not let us go, Zelensky continued. One observer later noted it was as if Charlie Chaplin had morphed into Winston Churchill. You see, this man knows TV. He is pulling off what Putin had during the Chechen war. The daily press appearances, videos from war zones, sharing meals with troops, addressing parliaments around the world, and all of this is working. Zelensky has become the most popular politician in the US, more popular than even US President Joe Biden. How tough should that be, you could ask? Zelensky knows how to win people over. He knows gimmicks. After he became president, he appointed his press secretary through an open competition. There were 4,000 candidates, and each of them were tested on their sense of humor and tolerance for stress. Zelensky also likes theatrics. He announced his election bid on live television on New Year's Eve. He once held a 14-hour-long press conference at a food market. Here's something he does not like: comedy at his expense. If comic Zelensky were to look at President Zelensky today, he would get a lot of fodder for his scripts. 1, the president has not been able to weed out corruption. 2, the Pandora Papers have exposed Zelensky's murky businesses. Volodymyr Zelensky has offshore holdings, his own companies in British Virgin Islands, Cyprus and Belize. His team says Zelensky is quote-unquote like any other business person in Ukraine, but you don't get to be both, a businessman and a statesman. 3, Zelensky has also displayed authoritarian traits. He has banned 3 TV stations in Ukraine. Observers say, just like Putin, Zelensky too may be seizing power from the oligarchs only to strengthen his own personal authority and advance his interests. In 2020, Zelensky dismissed a general prosecutor because he reportedly refused to pursue cases that helped the president's cause. A governor of a national bank was removed too because he was not loyal enough. The deputy governor too was removed because she had raised concerns about the bank's independence. 4, Zelensky has failed to deliver his biggest campaign promise. There is no peace in Donbass. The region has now been taken over by Russian forces. 5, Zelensky may have underplayed warnings of the war. He first accused the West of hurting Ukraine's morale. Then he decided to spook the world. He said Russia would attack on the 16th of February. Later, he said he was only quoting media reports. Today, Zelensky spends his days in bunkers, cheering his forces, appearing on TV every now and then. He's the only Ukrainian president to face a full-fledged invasion. He has the support of his voters. His approval ratings are at an all-time high. There is obviously a threat to his life. Zelensky, after all, is reportedly Russia's target number 1. He's often heard telling global leaders that this might be the last time you see me alive. And every time a parliament applauds Zelensky, he says, thank you, but we want you to do more. There is no doubt he has risen up to the occasion. But come to think of it, he did not have much of a choice either. Fleeing Ukraine means losing presidency and a lot more. The Western media is drawing parallels between Zelensky and the emergency team that responded to 9/11. They've already pronounced him a hero. But it may be too early to say how history will judge this president of Ukraine.
Good evening to you. Claims that the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, purchased luxury villas using Western aid money. I presume that's military aid money. Truth or fake?
That's right, Mark. President Zelensky recently ended his European tour aimed to replenish Ukraine's arms deliveries as the country gears up for a counter-offensive against Russia. In the sidelines of this visit, accounts on social media have been sharing this video showing 3 luxury properties allegedly owned by President Zelensky and purchased with Western aid money following the war in Ukraine. One example of these claims, originally in French, this user that says, "What does Zelensky spend our money on?" Zelensky owns luxury real estate. So we're going to take a look at the residences and question the properties one by one. We have the images right here. The first residence allegedly in Crimea that according to the claims cost President Zelensky about $25 million. Second, there's this villa in Forte dei Marmi, Italy at a cost of about 20 million euros. And the third claim is this villa in England that the Ukrainian president allegedly bought at a cost of 27 million pounds. all allegedly financed by the money that Zelensky received from his Western allies, according to the claims. Mark?
So, do these villas, mansions, big houses actually belong to Volodymyr Zelensky? That's the question.
Let's begin with the first property, the alleged castle in Livadia, Crimea, allegedly worth $25 million. We found this article in Reuters from May 2019, where we learned that President Zelensky's wife, Elena Zelensky, bought this penthouse in this apartment complex in Crimea in 2013, so before Russia's annexation of Crimea in March 2014. And this property right here is no secret. It appears in Zelensky's tax return from March 2021 that also specifies that the property is a 130 square meter apartment that, according to Ukrainian media, actually cost about $160,000, not $25 million. An apartment that may soon no longer belong to the presidential couple after the leader of Crimea declared that this apartment was going to be given to people in need in efforts to nationalize, as they say, objects that bring income to the enemy.
So, one fake exposed. Let's move on to that villa in Italy. Price tag 20 million euros. Truth or fake? Tell us.
Indeed, Mark, we found information on this property in Italy, in Forte del Maimi, that allegedly cost Zelensky 20 million euros, according to the claims. In particular, we found this article from March 2019, published by Ukrainian investigative media called Slitstvo Info, where they reveal that this 15-room villa does indeed belong to the Ukrainian president. That, according to the president's tax returns from 2019, Zelensky purchased this villa in 2015, a villa of 413 square meters. So long before, a villa purchased long before the current Russian invasion of Ukraine. But contrary to the claims, this villa was not worth 20 million. It was an exaggerated price. This villa cost the president about 3.8 million euros, according to Ukrainian investigative media.
So Zelensky bought that a lot earlier than it was alleged. It's not worth what, the value is nothing like what was quoted. And clearly, one has to remember he was a very successful showbiz entertainer before he became president. So perhaps he had the cash in his back pocket.
Zelensky's 5-year presidential term, but Ukraine's March election was suspended because of the war, and Zelensky will remain in power under martial law powers. Some on the right were frustrated by the news. Popular X user Tim Young wrote on X, quote, Zelensky banned opposing political parties and will now continue to remain in office without an election.
In 2014, and it was called the Minsk Accords. And so what that was supposed to do was avoid a war between Russia and Ukraine. And what was the war over? So the people, the Russia-speaking separatists in the Donbass, didn't want to go along with the coup of Ukraine. So a bunch of right-wingers overthrew the government with the help of the United States and the CIA in 2014, overthrew the government. And the people in the Donbass didn't want to go along with it. The Russian-speaking people in the eastern part of Ukraine didn't want to go along with this coup. And so there was fighting. And so we had the Minsk agreement, and that was supposed to give autonomy to the people in the Donbass. And then they were supposed to be able to have their own local elections. And the Ukraine government was going to stop bombing them. Well, they never abided by it. The Ukraine government never stopped bombing them, never gave them autonomy. And the Minsk agreement, now we're finding out from Angela Merkel, that was just to buy Ukraine time so they could build up their military for this war that they knew they were provoking. That's what the story is. That's the actual story. So there you go. They weren't. So now why would Russia ever negotiate with Ukraine or NATO in good faith? Because Ukraine wasn't Nobody was in the West negotiating with good faith. And so they provoked this war. Who wanted this war? Russia didn't want this war. You know who did? The United States and NATO. They wanted this war. And so we got a war. The Ukraine people don't want this war. Zelensky doesn't want this war. He's doing it because he knows if he doesn't, he'll get killed by the right-wing Azov battalion, the Nazis in Ukraine, or he'll get disappeared by NATO. I mean, look what we did to Saddam Hussein after we were done with the Saddam Hussein. We hanged him.
You know,
that's what we do. Look what we did with Gaddafi when we were done with Gaddafi. We killed him, and we overthrew his country. And so that's exactly what we would do to Zelensky, which is why he's going along.
President Volodymyr Zelensky said he never planned to honor the 2014-2015 Minsk agreements to create peace between Russia, he said in a recent interview with a German magazine. Now, while he never planned to honor the agreements, he was elected on the promise of ending the Donbas war.
Russia was telling the truth the whole time. Look what just happened today. Angela Merkel came out and she said, yeah, Minsk 2 was always a sham. We only did it to buy time so NATO could build the Ukrainian military so they could launch an attack to take over the Donbass. Saying, no, that's true, which means Emmanuel Macron is also a lying sack, which means Joe Biden is too, because Joe Biden promised Vladimir Putin that he would look Germany, France, and Ukraine in the eye back in June 2021 and say, you must implement Minsk. But we now know it was all a lie, all a lie. The United States, Germany, France were conspiring with Ukraine since 2015 to drag this out until NATO built a Ukrainian military capable of launching an attack on the Donbass and liberating. They had no intention of having peace. They always wanted this war. And everybody was saying, oh, the Russians are making it up, that Ukraine was building an army and going to invade the Donbass. Merkel just said it was. She said, that's what we were doing. That's the whole purpose of what we were doing, is to buy time to build up an army to invade.
Что сейчас прозвучало, говорит только о том, что мы все правильно сделали с точки зрения начала специальной военной операции. Почему? Потому что, оказывается, все эти Минские соглашения никто не собирался исполнять.
Violence, riots, unrest. Behind all this is one troublemaker that sows the seeds of instability and conflict in different parts of the world.
All of you in this room have good reason to be proud.
The National Endowment for Democracy, or NED, was founded in 1983. A legacy of the Reagan administration. It is ostensibly an NGO that promotes democracy abroad and claims to be dedicated to the development of human rights, independent media, and the rule of law in other countries. However, is this really the case? This is Victoria Nuland, an official of the U.S. Department of State, who also happens to be an NED expert and board member. Nuland appeared in Ukraine on November 21, 2013, when the country was mired in political turmoil. In a leaked telephone conversation, Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt, then U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, discussed the hand-picking candidates for a new Ukrainian government, showing how deeply they were involved in the opposition's political campaign.
In terms of him not going into the government, just let him sort of stay out and do his political homework and stuff.
I think Yats is the guy who's got the economic experience, the governing experience.
Suspiciously, records of aid or financial support for Ukraine have been removed from NED's website. However, clues about NED budget document collected by media can still be found on the website of Monthly Review. The document details NED's financial support for various organizations in Ukraine. The number of projects funded, as well as the amount of funds, are staggering. This is not the first time that NED, a cover for the US government, interfered with democratic election in Ukraine. NED interfered in the Ukrainian presidential election of 2004. It backed the pro-American candidate Yushchenko, who led the Orange Revolution to overturn the election result and eventually became the president. To help the opposition seize power, the United States, through NED and other government agencies, plowed billions of dollars into supporting anti-government organizations, journalists, judges, and trade unionists, according to the Canadian Dimension. According to the Boston Globe, NED praises an organization as an independent agent of freedom and liberation once it agrees to accept money from the United States. That is the definition of independence and freedom in NED's dictionary. As interfering other countries' affairs is prohibited by UN conventions and international law, NED plays the role of de facto CIA when it is inconvenient for the latter to operate openly. It intervenes on behalf of the US under the pretense of promoting democracy. Alan Weinstein, founder of NED, confessed with the Washington Post in an interview in 1991 that a lot of what they were doing was what the CIA had done 25 years ago. NED was therefore known globally as the second CIA.
Nowadays, instead of having just the CIA going around behind the scenes and trying to manipulate the process secretly by inserting money here and instructions there and so forth, they have now a sidekick, which is this National Endowment for Democracy, NED.
NED has four main institutions: National Democratic Institute, International Republican Institute, American Center for International Labor Solidarity, Center for International Private Enterprise. Through these institutions, NED masterminded separatist riots, regime changes, political crisis, disinformation. Ukraine is just one of its numerous targets. NED was also an important enabler of the Arab Spring, providing financial support to pro-America individuals and groups. It exported anti-government propaganda, incited color revolutions, and plunged the Arab world into conflicts, unrest, and recession. NED instigated the color revolution in Bolivia, forcing President Evo Morales to resign and go into exile. Creating political instability in Belarus, the United States masterminded color revolution against the Belarusian government. In addition, NED orchestrated violent coup in Haiti, influenced elections and constitutional referenda in Kyrgyzstan, stirred up protests and confrontations in Thailand, incited oppositions in Nicaragua to seize power by force, interfered in Mongolia's parliamentary elections, and Uganda's presidential election. Turmoil, violence, catastrophe. Behind all this, a troublemaker is pulling the strings. It hides under the cover of promoting democracy and human rights. But what lie beneath the glorified pretense? Is it hypocrisy, selfishness, hegemony, or something even darker? Only time will tell.